Hi, everyone. Welcome to Type Talks. Today we're here with Dario Nardi, and we're here to discuss the ESFP subtypes, starting with the dominant subtype. Dario calls this the charismatic leader, and this kind of ESFP has more wiring near the front of their brain. They are more driven and confident than other ESFPs, and they're also correlated with the hormone testosterone.
Mm. Yeah, thank you for having me back. And it's interesting joy, I guess we'll say it that way, to explore my opposite type. And, sharing all the same four functions in common. This is a reminder to everybody, what is your opposite type? Four functions, favorite ones in common, but the opposite in terms of the order of them. Yeah, so the dominant, I think a really great example starting off is Bill Clinton. And like I would say with all celebrities, I don't stand by that this person must be this type or something like that because we can't know that. Even if the person has done MBTI, if it was rather superficial and whatever, I'm not sure that we can trust that result. But for the most part, I think that if I wanted to give an example out in the world of a dominant ESFP that people know of and not just as a personal acquaintance, then Bill Clinton, I think, is a good example. Somebody who has charm and energy. One of the highlights I think that was mentioned is that many people commented when he was sort of moving up through the ranks in politics and even as president, when people, even his opponents, strongly disagreed with him coming from the other party and whatever, they said he was very likable in person, and that when you entered the room, he really treated everybody with friendliness and with warmth. And that was actually for somebody, I mean, Gen X, being very aware of how America was in the 90s, very, very different than today. Things like balanced budget, for example. Oh my God. And actually like very little partisanship compared to how things are today. And I would say not that it's the only factor, but Bill Clinton was very much an example of the pragmatic ESFP, who is driven and confident and has this way of like getting things done and making things happen with people. And because it is ESFP and we want to see the pattern of the whole type, there is very much this grounding and extroverted sensing, like what is actually working, what is actually going on. Sure, the person has values, but those are more like personal values. And then there's this supporting somewhere in there extroverted thinking that is also about like getting things done and what is the actual, like, is it effective? So what we see, as you mentioned, is this bias towards the front of the brain. Sure. So they're very quick in terms of both bringing in information and decision making. And this is relative to other ESFPs who are already quick in this area. So this is like extra so. And in addition, I would say they're bringing in this other information, like noticing people's body language, their voice tone, noticing all the things that are moving in the environment, being aware of the options for action, and being able to respond to that. Unlike some other types that was sort of like a dominant subtype that tend to be like really just mostly forward, the ESFPs that I looked at, and I don't remember how many we had, but it was a fair number. It was over 30, which for brain imaging is a good number of people, just for one personality type. That there still was this underlying supportive, I want to say, like even field patterns, so that they still, when they need to, can sort of like go into their quiet space and be like, okay, A leads to B leads to C. Like, are we sure we want to do that? Is this going to work? Yeah, they are, but for the most part, they are going to be the ones that are like the extroverted extroverts. That they're very active physically, that they're meeting new people, they're pursuing their ambitions, they're popular. They do have this sensitivity to other people. I think that when they're younger, they don't necessarily do anything with that. Like they notice what's going on with people, but because like with all of the SFP NTJ types, the emotional orientation is on the self very much and not paying attention. Really, I'm not saying paying attention, not really caring emotionally. Like, oh, those people have their emotions, they can deal with it. I have my emotions, I'll deal with mine. That when they're younger, They're very much as this fun-loving quality, and they don't want anybody who's a downer or something like that. But I think as they get a little bit older, that they can become like that practical counselor. And even if the person isn't president of the United States, they can be an executive, or I would even say somebody who's running their own business is very comfortable and confident meeting other people, clients, rich people, poor people, people with a lot of potential as clients, people with a little potential. The company has 5 employees, it has 50, it has 500. I think that when it has more, they are the kind of type that they want to meet everybody and know what's going on. They're not that kind of shy leader who's like, oh, I'm going to lead from behind. ESFP that way is like weak, like, what are you doing? Um, that they really want to be in the midst of it and know everybody and what's going on and to be known as well. I think they're even the kind that if they're, say, a counselor, that they could easily be something in a quite challenging situation, like prison counselor, for example. It's like, yeah, we this is a difficult situation, and they have empathy, but they also have a lot of confidence, and those two can, and they're likable, so they can come out. I noticed when I looked at the backgrounds of the people who scored this way, I mean, whose brain wiring came out this way, that they still had some background that was technical in nature, like not super technical, but things like, oh yeah, my major was marketing or media production. Um, they're also going to excel when you look at sort of like their resume with things like talent scout, being a recruiter, the things that allow them to go out and sort of hunt and find people and interact with them and then match people up. And that gives them the sort of the fun and variety in life, that if they're not in a leadership position, that they're still going to direct their energy somewhere to, like, seeing that they're making things happening, that stuff is happening. I would say that having that spice is important. They are the kind that will ride a motorcycle and engage in extreme sports. Clearly, then this differentiates them from, say, ESFJ, which is not going to be doing these things, even the dominant version. Um, and yeah, ESFJ will stick to a bicycle. The ESFP dominant is going to go for the motorbike, and I would say if there is sort of a type crossover, this is the type that can easily score, either because of their sort of their big picture seeing things as ENFP, or the sensing and thinking together directed to the outer world, like even ENTJ, which is almost their opposite. Like they'll take the MBTI and come out as ENTJ, and you're thinking like, really? Um, Especially when you're only dealing with dichotomies, those kinds of questions rather than the functions. If you present them with the functions, they're going to much sooner notice, as long as ESFP is not presented in too much of like an irresponsible way. Not that we don't know, like this, like all SPs, they can get into trouble on the side because they want to keep life fun, and then you run into people who have these strict rules, and like, what do you do? And they like to negotiate around those, but that doesn't always work. And like with all the dominant types, there's this, or subtypes, there is this element of um, like introspection is something you do just occasionally and in your own space. And especially for ESFP, well, for all the S, well, ISFP as well, and all the ESFPs, the introverted intuiting is their, not just their aspirational area, but their dark corner, and not wanting to, like, there are demons in the dark corner that they can get freaked out by stuff, and completely unexpected and not know where it's coming from. It's like that there's the yang aspect of introverted sensing, which is like a vision of the future, and usually that's, they can understand because it's a little bit more outward directed, and it has that sort of dominant energy to it. But then the yin version of introverted intuiting is like dreams and archetypes and the unconscious and images and mysticism and ghosts and all of these things that they're like, don't want to think about it at all, because the moment they start thinking about it, then life becomes a little bit scary, like, oh god, we could die tomorrow. And philosophy, and oh, that's such a downer, like, don't want to think about that. So those are like, I would say, like typical qualities, ways to spot the dominant ESFP.
Yeah. And I'm guessing that the dominant ESFP is also very good at empowering you to also step up more in your life or show up more in your life as well. They're not only good at creating opportunities in their own life, but also getting you to see the opportunity in your life to experience more or to be more confident in yourself.
Absolutely. I feel like thank you for mentioning that a big theme for ESFPs, all of them is to get people out of their shell to like actually get a little bit of confidence and do something. And the dominant ESFP still wants those individual connections and successes. Now, the individual connection might actually be a neighborhood or community that they go into, and then they see the whole community is doing better as opposed to just one person in front of them. But they're not the kind of person who's just like, oh yeah, let's like launch this government initiative and then I don't need to look at it again because that will take care of itself. That's not rewarding to them. Like they want to see actual flourishings that they were involved with, that they helped make it happen. And I think that it's that authenticity and that connectedness is what people sort of say, well, I don't necessarily agree in this policy or that approach or this idea that the ESFP has, but we can see that they're authentic in it. Like they're actually willing to take their personal time to sit down with somebody and help them out. And it shows up with the other ESFPs, but I would say the most with harmonizing, but even the dominant, as you said, like will come in and be sort of fearlessly sit down with somebody and have a conversation with them.
Well said, well said. And that brings us to the creative subtype. And so Dario calls this the energizing entertainer. And this ESFP has a starburst pattern in their brain. And they're also driven by the hormone dopamine. And this subtype is more experimental and social and more rebellious.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So of course, ESFPs tend to already be pretty social, but not necessarily. There are some ESFPs who are more reclusive that, especially normalizing and harmonizing, that they stay more with their circle of friends and so on. They don't feel like, oh, I don't need to impinge myself onto others. But this version is definitely much more of an adventure. I feel like it matches very well the Western Myers-Briggs David Kiersey classic description of ESFP. The person who is entertaining, who is the stage performer, whether they're singing or dancing or both. There's all this activity, they're uninhibited. Um, and so this is the kind that gets highlighted. Whereas I have to say in Europe, one of the complaints that Europeans have, and I've talked to a couple of two, I mean, in particular, I remember conversations live in person with ESFPs who are like, yeah, in general, like I know I'm an ESFP, but the part about being entertaining really grates on me. They're like, I want to enjoy life and have fun, but I'm not about entertaining people. And then what I found is that actually European brains and American brains statistically aren't the same. That European brains tend to be a little bit more sophisticated and more towards the harmonizing quadrant of things. Um, which means that they are about connecting and having fun still, but not this like daredevil adventurous kind of thing. So what does it mean, the creative subtype? So there's the starburst pattern, and the starburst pattern is really about taking all the information that's coming in continuously and working with that in some way. So like grabbing this and doing that, and this ends up making it very easy if they're just like out on an adventure. They're doing a safari. They're just like, yeah, let's go out and drive around for the day and see what we see. There's this very adventurous, bold. They're also expressive, curious, and the curiosity is mostly about people, like getting to know people and what's going on with them and their like interests in psychology and stuff like that. They're not going to sit there and go in great depth with somebody. They're not actually interested usually in the content of the specialty. So INTPs listening out there, or ISTPs, you sit down with the ESFP and they seem interested in what you're doing. They are interested, but they're interested in what it means to you, not like all the minutia of the ideas. The moment the dialogues detaches from the person, then and it's just like some abstract subject, they're like, I don't even know, they're literally like, I'm lost, I don't even know what we're talking about. Because they want that connection that's there. So they're very connected in a very fluid way to their environment. and what's going on. That said, that they still have the strong center. I think they have this introverted feeling, which is very much like me, my, mine. They're probably the most like self-interested version, even though they're the one with the most capacity to connect with strangers and a general audience and that kind of thing. They still very much have like, yeah, I'm doing what I want to do, and you can do what you want to do. Of course, they're very appreciative of being creative subtype. Usually, like style, beauty, the artisticness of something, the atmosphere, the taste of the food, that kind of thing. Like they really appreciate that. They may not be able to afford those things, but in fact, they may be the kind of person that spends money on shoes that they can't really afford. But that ability, that impulse in the moment, that dopamine impulse is really quite strong. And for ESFP, it's dopamine is a motor dopamine. It's very much about doing things. But it also can be acquiring things and being materialistic. And that's one of the downsides of sensing when it's just overdone and it's imbalanced. Any of the sensing types can end up being materialistic. I would say in terms of discipline, they're not very disciplined, except if they need to learn something that they're actually genuinely interested in doing. Like say they're a dancer, they're going to learn dance steps. Like no problem whatsoever. But if you ask them to learn other stuff, like memorizing things, they're going to be like, eh. So the motivation, again, it's very much like self-interested and like, what is my motivation for things? They're very, very good at picking up skills. All ESFPs are, but the most, I would say, of all of them, just random new skills. Oh, I've never driven like, I've seen this. So my stepmother, who is ESFP, I never got to do brain imaging on her, so I don't know what she was. I think she was probably normalizing, but still, I think the story tells a lot that she needed to drive a truck at one point. And it wasn't an 18-wheeler, but it was also not a 4-wheeler. I don't remember, like I can't visualize like how many wheels there were at the time. And she needed to back it up. And she did it perfectly on the first attempt. And I want to emphasize to people knowing this from studying fuzzy set theory and fuzzy math years ago. And that's a discipline, fuzzy math. It's a technical term. That's actually a very difficult task to back up a truck that has many wheels. And she did it so amazingly well. And there were other circumstances similar to this, like very quick reaction patterns that happen. So they really can look, you're like, wow, how did you learn that? Like they did sewing 2 or 3 times and then they're like, oh, I need to sew a costume. Boop, like there's a costume. And you're like, how did you figure that out so fast? And to them, it's just obvious. They can get very impatient. They're the most impatient of maybe the dominant. They're sort of in the running with it as well. But they're like, well, why don't you get it? Why can't you do it? I asked you to do something. Why didn't you do it? And the other person is like, well, I wasn't sure how. To them, when you say like, I wasn't sure how, that's like such a bad reason to say something. Because they're like, well, you just like look at it and you play with it a little bit and you figure it out. And it shouldn't take more than a few minutes. That's their thinking. I think also what you said, they do like to turn on light bulbs for people. And it's really fun to just like randomly encounter somebody, knowing that might even be the one encounter only that they'll ever have, and be completely present with that person in that moment and then never see them again. And that for them is like a completely normal thing to do, to just like drop into that moment with that person. And similarly, if they're doing something that's entertainment oriented, like a singer, dancer, artist, musician, whatever it is, they really love making an impact on people and people getting into it and having an experience that's memorable, that is meaningful for them, that those people had a great time with their friends, that the music like touched them some way in their heart, that ideally that touching them even motivated them to improve something in their lives, that they would really like to think that's the case. They're not just singing for like the fun of singing, that they want to know that they're making some kind of positive impact. Yeah, there's a great and again, I don't know if in the story of the talented Mr. Ripley, not Mr. Ripley, but the other character who's like very charismatic, the rich guy, whether he's ENFP or ESFP. But there is this sense with this kind of ESFP that when things are good and the sun is shining, then they're like the sun and everything is amazing. And then when they become moody, they retreat, they're dark, they get bored, they tire of somebody that becomes irritating to them. Then it's like all of a sudden the sun is gone. And when is it going to come back? Which can be like a shock to people because they're not there for the benefit of the other person, except if they feel that that's what they want to do. So the moment their inner feeling changes, like if their inner feeling changes that motivated a particular song, they're just going to have to like sing a new song because that's the way it is. They may be very present with somebody in the moment, and that person will think like, "Oh, this is like a great friend." Well, yes, but then the time comes when the friendship is over. I also think with the starburst pattern, if their executive wiring is not very strong, then they can be a little bit chaotic emotionally and behaviorally and get themselves into trouble. I don't mean like getting in trouble with the law or something obvious like that, although it could happen, but just like stirring up trouble, like being very easygoing and then all of a sudden being insulted. And people are like, oh, well, where did that come from? And so there is this, this challenge of trying to be everything everywhere all the time, and no matter what, like to be on, to be like the sun, to be open to everything. And yet when they can do it, it's amazing. Like to me, it's very inspiring watching. I met somebody who in ESFP. I mean, he was in the lab. I have his brain results, and he's actually is not. He's creative second. He's harmonizing first, but he's like he's a rap music like producer, and that ability to just come up with something on the fly, like rhyming lines on the fly in like a contest, like who does that, and entertaining the audience and coming up with stuff spontaneously, and it's sort of like a like an Eminem kind of personality. And that's and by M&Ms, folks, for who are too young, I'm not referring to the edible M&M candy. I'm referring to the singer. That there can be a lot of drama in their lives, but there also is a lot of authenticity and passion and energy and creativity.
Makes sense, makes sense. It seems like the creative ESFP, a phrase I would kind of associate with them, is like a 5-minute affair. It's like they're really present in the moment when they're having that experience. But once it's over and out of sight, out of mind. And they're like, oh, that person still wants to be friends or that person still wants to hang out. I had a really great night with them, but I've moved on to this cool new experience that I'm going to do over there. So.
Yeah, yeah, and it's often very confusing to other people that this kind of ESFP who's like, oh, like let's go to this music concert next weekend, or let's go on a road trip together, and they really mean that in that moment, and then the time comes and they quote completely flake out, but for them they're immersed in something else, and that just didn't work. And if it had worked, that would be great, and then it would happen, but don't count on that because they are very much. I mean, all the SPs are like this, but certainly the extroverted, creative subtype SPs are very much out of sight, out of mind. There's only here and now, and if you want to be with them, like you need to be working with them or a roommate or something like that, because otherwise, this person, they're not even thinking about you as they're doing whatever they're doing. Even if
Hmm.
they like you and they said like let's do this and that together and really felt that, they're just like, yeah, they're only in the moment.
Makes sense, makes sense. And that brings us to the normalizing subtype. And so Dario calls this the lively participant. And the CSFP has more of an even field pattern in their brain. And this subtype is correlated with the hormone serotonin. And this kind of ESFP is more specialized than others of this personality type.
More conventional in a way. Yeah, being able to fit in with the establishment. Like this is the ESFP who can actually work in a large company. and sustain that and be working day in and day out and following a routine, and like does a lot of small things in order to keep it interesting and is chipper and so on, but is still also detailed and organized and can manage a huge like volume actually of material and work, that their sensing and thinking functions, the thinking even though it's third, really can work together in a way that's, yeah, like let's just get stuff done, and they just throw themselves, they immerse themselves into that work ethic. So if the dominant ESFP immerses herself or himself in leadership, in making something happen for the community or the world, um, and then the creative one is like throwing themselves into their adventure or their music, that this version is throwing themselves completely into their family, there's more immediate, like their own community and their workplace, and are there stepping up every day at the workplace, and they're meeting with clients and they're making things happen, and they actually do see a lot of rewards. The rewards are not like the highest office in the land or like a huge dopamine rush that's all at once being on stage, but it is this joy of many small things like closing deals and having success with clients, and even just something fun like, yeah, we went out to dinner with the clients and we had drinks and it was a great time, and then we closed this deal and we made more money than we thought we would, and then there were bonuses that came with it. I mean, this ESFP, mind you, does need to be motivated with some bonuses, and commissions, that kind of thing. Don't take them for granted, just because they can fit in a way that the other ones find more difficult. Um, they are still also going to be frustrated if it's too routine. Like they have a limit, so do keep in mind like they're more conventional and more tolerant than other ESFPs, but they would still prefer to be talking and meeting with people whenever possible over, say, sitting in front of a computer. Like there's no question about it. They still want to be moving around and so on. They multitask very well. So that multitasking isn't necessarily like physical, or want to say like instrumental multitasking. Um, that it really is like, oh, as things are coming in over here and I'm talking to this person over there, and then there's something interesting happening over there, like they can keep track of all of that and handle all those little like things that come in and the out, the inboxes and the outboxes and the little gophers that pop up and the surprises, and then the exercise that they want to do on the side. And in fact, it's very important for them if they do have one area of their life that's very set in routine, like work, everything else has to be as fluid and open as possible in order to compensate. So when the evening comes or the weekend, whatever it is, there are no plans until they arrive at that point. And if there is a plan, it's something very general like, yeah, we're escaping to the wilderness for the weekend. And then they'll get on their motorcycle and do that. And I use a motorcycle example because I know like two ESFPs in the database who were motorcycle people. And I know there's like a more, what is it, culturally specific term, but I don't know what it is. Motor folk, not that. I also noticed something interesting that thinking specifically of an ESFP friend of mine who's like administrative assistant, which is a job they do very well, by the way, as long as the person they're working for doesn't micromanage, which just drives them nuts, that they usually have some kind of secret long-term projects and interests. And this one friend I'm thinking of, administrative assistant, but on the side, has been writing for a couple of years a science fiction book. Now, mind you, the science fiction book has quite a bit of action in it, and it's more like your traditional space action kind of science fiction, but he's also been developing a whole cosmology that goes with it, like a backstory of what happened and what's going on with the characters and the world. And it actually very much is bringing an introverted intuiting, like his opposite type, but like in a corner of his life. And it's really a nice thing because it gives, instead of being afraid of the dark recesses of the unconscious, the person is creating this doorway to allow things to come up. If this ESFP, if any of the ESFPs don't have that kind of outlet, and that could be meditation, that could be something physical, whatever it is, if they don't have that outlet for the unconscious material, then it's going to be, all of the bad outlets, excessive drinking, inappropriate drugs, getting into fights, or doing things that are just like dangerous and sort of naughty to see if they can get away with it, and to see what happens. So there is this part that is splurging. So also then if they don't have a good outlet, then especially if they're constricted a lot in their work, then it's like, oh, well, now it's time to go shopping. And that applies to the male and female ESFPs. It's just what they buy is different, but that's it. And maybe they're buying experiences, um, rather than. But they probably it's toys that go with the experience, and that's really like the skiing equipment kind of thing. Um, they're often involved with their community. They tend to be really good as like as a parent, or even grandparent, because they're very good at lots of little daily adventures and daily amusements, rather than so they're not going to take their kids like skydiving when they're small, but they are going to do things that are fun for the kids, like going to the amusement park and whatever, and everybody enjoys that. And I mean, the family enjoys it, and that for them it's like all those little adventures and escapes are very nice. So I think that we have to remember, like, still normalizing has these ESFP needs. It's just that they're much better at the like daily routine part of it. Like even somebody who's in a very, like, say, makeup artist or hairstylist, they still, and there's some flexibility in their schedule, but they have to show up like for their client. Like there's just no, and they need to be there, and they may do many multiple 16, 18-hour days, for example, and then all of a sudden be like, oh, I have to take a break. Or they're taking stimulants like coffee and this and that to get through those days, and then they collapse. That can happen too. So some of this is all ESFPs. I just think when it happens to this version, it's not like, this is not the stereotypical version of ESFP. That's like the David Kiersey, Myers-Briggs version, but it is one that's probably the most common, like the actual everyday person. um and they they still have like their ESFP needs underneath, and trying to maintain that structure and rhythm every day is not always easy for them.
Absolutely, yeah. And I'm wondering if the ESFP who's normalizing finds their novelty in the new people that come into their workplace all the time. It's like, oh, it's unexpected how I'm going to interact with this person, and that excites me. That I get to just talk to this person and in the moment figure out a response to them. And they
Mm.
might be the kind of coworker who is able to chitty chat and make jokes with their other coworkers.
Hmm.
And that's where they find that excitement and adrenaline.
Yes, yes. And thing to know about all SPs, but some of them in particular, um, is that if life isn't interesting enough, they're going to make it interesting. And that can also mean not be the type isn't, for example, prone to spread gossip, but they might start talking about someone or something because they're just bored. And then that has this ripple effect of creating drama in the workplace. And they didn't even really mean to do that. But on the other hand, yes, they were bored, and it's sort of amusing to see what's happening. And then it's a crisis to solve. And so in this version, let's say this ESF normalizing ESFP is like a firefighter. There is this adventure that happens, and if for some reason the adventuring stops, then they're gonna, they're looking, either I need to change my job or my position, or I need to make a crisis happen in order to have something to solve. That's not the healthy version of it, but that is something that happens. I mean, I know one normalizing ESFP, younger, is a paramedic. I mean, it's a shocking job, paramedic. People die every day. Like they die right there in front of you. The human life is over. The gore, and it like that happens also, accident sites, that kind of thing. I'm like, wow, like how do you do that? And he said, well, it's also very rewarding because for every person who dies, there are several people who live, and they live because of me or because of us, in the as paramedics. And that's tremendously rewarding, to like really be with somebody on the edge of life and death. Not this like fake, like, oh, this it was like the event we went to was so unsafe. I felt threatened because like somebody used a word that they didn't like. No, this is actual life and death. And the ESFP is like, I literally like pull people every day from the jaws of death. And yet it seems like such a routine job on the surface. And that's I mean, maybe that's a little bit of an extreme example, but I feel it's a great example of for ESFP. I don't think that's sustainable for any person, but it is very much I think trying to understand like how this type works.
Beautiful illustration. And that brings us to the harmonizing ESFP. And so Dario calls this the soulful uplifter. And this ESFP has more of a multi-diamond field pattern in their brain. And so the left and the right region link up to each other in that manner. And they are guided by the hormone estrogen and oxytocin. And so this kind of ESFP is more empathic and reflective than other ESFPs.
Yeah. This is one of the subtypes of just a few out of 64 where Dr. Viktor Galenko, who has a book out, and he's Ukrainian, but the book is done with a co-author, so it's in English. And this is one of the subtypes, just a few of them, where my version and his version don't really match, and or in a way that they do, but we look at different like developmental levels. So he sort of focuses on the subtype as being the kind that likes to go out and sunbathe and enjoy life and experience the pleasures of life and is not really that interested in working if they can get away with it. That they are just and they're not even like super outgoing. Like they can be. They have all the skills to be outgoing, but they're only going to invest that skill into a few people who actually matter to them. And I don't disagree with any of that, but having encountered these in the database, mostly among people who came to me, looking at them in the workplace, for example, and also some number of them who were in Europe, especially, so that they were like human resources or coaches or consultants in Europe and ESFP with this like complex pattern. And they're not the kind that just sunbathes and is lazy and doesn't want to do stuff. Although they may have that side to them. That really this is the version of the type that is probably the most hidden and most likely to be mistyped as something else until you sort of spend time with them and get to know. I think a way to understand it is remembering that for any harmonizing type, that the two preferred functions are both yin kind of functions that are more like bottom up, receptive, holistic feel to them. So that yes, they absolutely the holistic yin version of extroverted sensing enjoys life's pleasures. It's not about comfort. It's about pleasure, as particularly novel pleasures, but also appreciating yet another beautiful sunset. And there's like a grace and a charm that can go with that as well. And then there's the introverted feeling when it's in a yin style is not one focused monastic personality that's like a crusader, which is the yang version. It's much more like many different facets that I can be different things to different people, that there are many personas that even across like 5 different relationships, they'll show up differently in each relationship depending upon how that activates their feeling function, like what comes up out of it. And they're very comfortable floating with contradictions and negatives and positives, and they're not trying to force themselves to align with some kind of ideal. They're more just like flowing through life. And then imagine that person, and then that person, when they step up to be successful, what does that look like? And they're usually going to end up in something that really taps those skills in that flexibility and a little bit of quietness and like not as expressive, certainly not all in your face and loud and that kind of thing. That they're more about moving through the environment and enjoying it and it's like moving through the circus of life, and appreciating, like, yeah, you have a conversation over here and you have a coffee over there, and then you talk to somebody and you sort of start to make a deal with them, and you're going to sort of see where things go. And it really makes them very good, especially with their eye for quality and their openness. Things like international trade, like there could be part of like a company that like brings in, like they have to convince the people in one country, let's say they're indigenous people, to be making something that are hand goods, and there's like meaning around this and valuable. You're helping these people out, by buying their goods and reselling them, um, and having an eye for who's going to buy that and how do you describe it and what is the story behind it. um, I think a great example is somebody who's like does aid missions to a foreign country. I mean, they're not going there to be shot at. They're going there to help people. And there is this, and when you go to help people, you don't want to impose your culture on the people that you're visiting. You don't want to impose your impulses on them. You want to blend in and get to know them and try this different food and try this other thing. So just as there's this image of ESFPs who are like, yeah, let's, like, that person who's standing over there, like all quiet and like in their shell, like let's open them up and bring them out onto the dance floor. This person is a continuous state of opening themselves up to the world, and to meeting other people and sort of stretching themselves. And this then they can end up making good ambassadors, good diplomats, working with people, and it doesn't matter race, ethnicity, sex, like age, all of the social class. They're like whatever. Um, and so there is this openness to experiencing the world and still wanting to have like positive experiences and being adaptable, just not like forcing that on others. Um, and I think in terms of, you talked about like, wanting to know if they've helped people, or they helping. One thing that this subtype really likes is to sort of show people, a few people, the way, and then those people are the kinds that will then help a lot of other people. And so there is like they really appreciate, they're more sophisticated, so not just the immediate in the moment helping people, but like, let's empower these people in this village that has no water to like have a device that pumps the water for them and makes life a lot easier. And like, let's inspire some of the people there to like learn the technical skills in order to maintain it. And then wanting to also be an example for other people. Let's say there's some like college student who's coming along, or even high school student, and they're like, see what we're doing, like they can be an inspiration for that. And so they see it as something that's like very helpful and healing. And in fact, even if there's something like doctor or massage therapist, nurse, yoga teacher, there is a sense of like, I'm helping you to then help other people. And to have like a more, I want to say, like quality of life, higher quality of life, and even like a spiritual experience. And I have in the like a plant medicine, psychedelic, shamanic community, met ESFPs, and this is the kind of ESFP. Yeah, their style is still a little bit to throw people in the deep end and to see what happens and sink or swim, and they're very much still ESFP, but they are a little bit more like allowing space for others, and they're much more comfortable with this like spirit connection with life. I mean, literally, there are ESFP shamans, like it's a thing, and it's, they've really connected to their introverted intuiting in a different way than the dominant ESFP, who's like the leader, and the creative one who has like the sort of creative visions, or the normalizing whose vision is actually many small things, like a giant bag of marbles of life's little interesting, inspiring things. That this one is more like acting as a channel to help people.
I think that's wonderful. And I could see this ESFP also wondering if they're an NF at times too, because of that strong harmonizing. Like harmonizing can look NF in a lot of
Yeah.
ways.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And this is one that could easily score as ENFJ. And you might think, well, ENFJ and ESFP are not really that. I mean, they have what is it? Two letters in common, but they have a lot that's very different functionally, and yet, yeah, they can look very NF like at times. Um, I happen to know one very well, and so I have a good, and I've worked with one in a workplace setting, who was not so much the spiritual side of things, but who still had like this smoothness. Um, and the ESFP who was the rap music producer also, it was harmonizing, and his ability to get people to work together, really fantastic around something creative. He had some creative skill, of course, but his main talent was actually helping people work together in order for them to get their songs done and make their albums, and being the kind of person that, like, smooths over the drama that's going to happen between performers and that kind of thing. And and he was not, he was quite, like, I want to say, like, friendly and confident, but not in the way, not in like that Bill Clinton kind of way. It still was, he was also came off as like retiring, and like he sits there allowing other people to speak. Like he learned to, like, just sometimes just sit back and don't say anything and allow other people to speak. And when you do that, then you're going to get a lot more information,
Mhm.
and not make assumptions about that.
Mhm.
He's also one of the few people who said that the EEG process was sort of scary, which almost nobody says that. Like pretty much almost nobody, um, and which I found very interesting. Um, and yet yeah, he's a very interesting person. I mean, the ones that I've known here, very very interesting people, and they have a hard time fitting into any kind of, even though they're right adjacent to normalizing, like working in like a big company or something, like, no, that's absolutely a no-go for them. I mean, it would be real small company of people is one thing, but just being a cog, no way. Like that,
Mhm.
that's very tough.
Yeah. And so, Dario, I'm curious about what are the themes that all ESFPs share regardless of their subtype?
Sure. I would mostly say that they're active and they're fun. I would not use the word entertaining, but I would say that they pay a lot of attention to motivation, like their own, and what motivates others. They can easily engage other people. They don't necessarily want to, but they can. Um, they can be, so there's an interesting ability that they have. On the one hand, they can be very impatient for things to happen, and on the other hand, when they know it's important, then all of a sudden they can get very patient with somebody, and like allowing that person, like that little child, to help grow up, or that their client, like, make the discovery they need to make, whatever it is. Not all of them have a sense of style. Some of them don't, but for the most part, some of them are just like, oh, I wear what's comfortable. But for the most part, they do have their self-defined style. And um, I think especially when they're in a business setting, they're very good at presenting things. So this is something that can happen very easily, and I've heard stories like this. So I knew an INTP years ago who had been working in the entertainment industry, and he put in a lot of hours and a lot of work, and he was looking forward to getting a promotion. He was in a paid position. He wasn't just an intern. And then the new person came in, and I didn't meet this other person, but I saw photos and I heard stories about this person. Very much seemed like an ESFP, and the ESFP was only there for a few months and managed to sort of like, the ESFP had it had charisma, and also was able to get a hold of what was important to others, and make things happen. And within a few months was already promoted over this friend that I knew. And the friend was like, "This feels so unfair. Like, I put all this work in." I'm like, "Well, the ESFP is obviously cut out for whatever it is he's doing, or at least he knows how to get promoted." Um, whether he knows how to be, strategically planning for the future of the organization, probably not. But there is this like talent to even self-present, to imagine at any moment, and this is something they could practice as children or as teenagers, that go through just like even 10 minutes of your day. Let's say you're in the market, or let's imagine even if you're at home by yourself and there's a camera somewhere, that at every moment you're going to behave as if other people are watching you. Not to be paranoid and not for social conformity, but to imagine them as an audience. And how will that audience be moved by observing you? Do you know how to move? What is it that you would do in order to be glamorous, to be smooth, to be appealing? It's just, what are all the little behaviors that are needed? Again, not in like some kind of psychopathic way. Just we all practice different things. Some people practice math, some people practice thinking logically. It's just practicing being a performer, even if their job is not to quote perform on stage, a kind of thing. But in a way, we're always on stage. They love what you described, getting people out onto the dance floor, out of their shells. I mean, the metaphorical dance floor. They really like that. They like stimulating action. They like movement. They love pleasures. The pleasures of life are just, and those could be refined and small. They could be gross and simple and big. Like, it really depends upon social class and background and all of that stuff, context. But there really is this like taking pleasure and like savoring and enjoying life. They do like learning. They like learning how to skills and doing those skills, and they like learning about people to the extent that the person is actually interesting. And they love their freedom, and they're very good at testing limits. And which of course the other SPs are also. ESFP, dominant function, extroverted sensing. So even more so. Like, what is the little? Can I put a toe over the line and still get away with it? Can I flirt with somebody who's supposed to be a superior, or and it's an inappropriate, normally inappropriate circumstance, but I can get away with it? Like, can I do that? That makes life very adventurous. And if there's small things, that adds like spice to everyday life by just like testing those boundaries a little bit every day. Of course, there are some people who won't like that, and that's part of the ESFP's then learning curve to figure out like, how much can I get away with this person? Because they view it that if a person has like buttons to push or has like hypersensitivities or whatever, those are actually self-imposed limitations that the person has placed on themselves at a like almost psychological or spiritual level. And even if the ESFP is not thinking like, oh, psychology or spirituality, they love like, let's pull the thread out of this fancy suit that this person is wearing to protect and hide themselves, and like draw that out. I think a lot of times that's not conscious. That's not what they're consciously doing, but that's like a driver that is underneath there, which means risk taking. Um, and I think that there are times and about people they can care deeply, and at the same time, because especially their extroverted thinking is like very much in this neurotic zone, they can also just like be out of control. Like that fine line between extroverted sensing and the introverted feeling them is like, I want to do this and I feel like this. And extroverted sensing is like, all these delicious, pleasurable things. Or maybe it's bad stuff that they want to run away from. And extroverted thinking is like the only break that says, and maybe a little bit of extroverted feeling is a defensive measure. Like, this is the break to like, no, don't do this. And if that's not working, then they really can regret later. I mean, I've literally heard this from ESFPs. They're like, yeah, when I think back to how I behaved when I was young, there's a lot of things that I just went wild. Like, it was like completely not appropriate. And yet they can care very deeply. So that's like a really funny thing. Like, how do you blame someone who is very charming and who is actually caring, and yet at the same time a little bit irresponsible or pushing your limits? Even if they're responsible, they're still pushing your limits. Um, I think that their biggest danger is when they start analyzing stuff, like taking offense at things and wondering, did this person think that? Like ESFP has imagination, but it's the imagination that imagines that their partner is off having an affair. Like that's not a helpful imagination. So it's that opposite side can sometimes, come up. And I think then it's important for them to have positive outlets for their imagination. Um, and I would say in general, just know if you're like going to work with an ESFP, be aware that they literally can do almost any role in your organization. That doesn't mean like the exact technical, like engineering roles or whatever, although you would be surprised, but give them even a short like learning window and they can do almost anything. And that really is like this hidden superpower that often doesn't get. It just shows up as like a serial interest, usually in different jobs. Like it starts off as like gym instructor and then banker and then cosmetologist and you're like, wow, those are like very different jobs even. But to them, they're like, no, it was like an adventure and they're learning something new. And made money with one and made more money with another one because they still have this very practical hat on. But this superpower to like learn stuff. And now, of course, the more naturally intelligent they are, the easier that will be. Not every ESFP is a genius. But this ability to learn, even if they're not so bright, their ability to do hands-on stuff is usually still quite exceptional.
Yeah. And there's something about extroverted sensing that can also be very good at finessing a situation. It's
Mhm.
like, oh, you can make this situation work out if you just finesse it a little here. And yeah, so
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I get to watch this type up front with my stepmom. The good and the bad is true with every person. And then knowing ESFPs over the years, not like a ton, but a fair number. In fact, interestingly, in the workplace, as like coworkers, and being really quite struck at like how much they get done, how productive they can be, and how chill they are at the same time, as long as they don't feel like suffocated by the job requirements. And in this, ESFP hates officiousness and like, oh, well, we have to follow the policy exactly and whatever. That just gets them so irritated because they're like, this is just so unnecessary to be
mm.
like rigid like that. Um, but yeah, in general, like they really can roll with a lot of different things.
Yeah, and if someone is too rigid like that, they might be like, relax. Like, why are you taking this so serious?
Yes.
Chill and
Yes.
be calm.
Yeah.
Um, like with the extroverted sensing, they might think that someone is making a big deal out of something that you can adapt to easily.
Mhm. Yeah, they're mystified why other people can't adapt. Like, especially if it's small things. Like, if it's some huge thing, they'll be like, "Well, that's sort of understandable, like moving to a foreign country and learning a new language, like, it's admirable, but I understand that could be challenging for people." But, like, in the small things, like, they just don't get, like, why can't people adapt it? So, there's no reason to blow it up into something big.
Totally agree. And so thank you, Dario Nardi, for coming out today. If you like today's episode, feel free to check out his book. It is linked below, and it really dives into the 64 subtypes. And so thanks for coming out, sharing your thoughts on the ESFPs. I hope everyone enjoyed watching, and we'll see you all in the next one. Bye.
Yes. Well, bye-bye.